Hi, Cinematic Enthuse here. Today is March 16th, 2024. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about a movie I'm already about halfway through. And I wanted to give you guys a heads up so that maybe the next video I make when I talk about this movie, which is called Murder, He Says. It's a 1945 comedy mystery. So what I'll do is I'll post the link to where you can watch it. And that way, the next video I make, you guys can already watch it. And, there won't be as many spoiler alerts. Um, so I won't talk too much about it because I'm actually halfway through it right now. But I did want to mention a couple things. One, Fred MacMurray is wonderful. And as I'm watching it, I was watching it last night for a bit, and then I'm going to continue it today. Um, I just, every time I see him in these 30s and 40s movies, I'm like, I always forget how wide varied he is. His range is so huge. And it's really neat because, especially if you know Fred MacMurray from My Three Sons as an older man, it's hard to picture him in these 30s and 40s movies where he played so many different kinds of characters. He played like really intense characters, like a lot of people know in Double Indemnity, the very famous noir film, and some people only know him from that as far as classic film. But he did so many films, especially in comedy and screwball comedy, and he's very funny. He's so versatile. He can play like a wise kind of a smart aleck, sarcastic kind of wit in one screwball comedy, and then he can turn around and play like he does in this particular movie that I've started, Murder He Says, 1945. He plays kind of an innocent character and like a bumbling, not like a he's not like a forgetful professor, but like just a little bit naive, but in a good way, and it just makes it really fun to watch. And so this kind of falls into a category of screwball comedies, like tend to, at least for me, I think there's at least two big categories. And screwball comedy can also be used in a movie that isn't screwball comedy at all. Like screwball comedy, the style can be used like briefly in like, a 2-minute sequence in a drama, for example. But most of the time, the way I like to watch it is as its own, um, you know, movie. And I guess a lot of the movies I talk about are really, they're kind of a mix of screwball and also of like, just classic comedy or farce, or sometimes they're sophisticated comedies. Sometimes they're like bedroom farce. Sometimes they're satire. Sometimes there's one more category I'm missing and I can't think of it right now. But anyway, this particular one is the mystery category. And so a lot of people might know like the screwball mystery hybrid that is the Thin Man series, for example. The first Thin Man movie, especially, and I think even the second one, I think is The Return of the Thin Man. So those are like mysteries, but they have a very kind of screwball tone to them. And of course, Nick and Nora have that banter together, and that kind of gets carried even through when you look at like TV shows like Moonlighting from the 1980s, that I think we're either going after a His Girl Friday, Rosalind Russell, Cary Grant kind of vibe, or a Nick and Nora kind of vibe. We solve mysteries together. We, in their case, in Bruce Willis's and um, I don't call her Candice Bergen. Oh my gosh, I'm forgetting her name. You know who I'm talking about. I just talked about her last week. This is so bizarre. Um, Sybil Shepherd. Oh my gosh. I always wanted to call her Candice Bergen. Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis, of course. You know, and that's how people kind of know about, without knowing about Screwball, they either know that TV show or they know the Goldie Hawn movie Overboard, which I think is a bizarre example. If I was going to think of a 90s Screwball or an 80s Screwball that's a movie, I would think more of like Soap Dish. That's definitely got a Screwball vibe to it. It's an ensemble comedy, but it's got that kind of fast paced, quick, witty dialogue. um Maybe it's not as traditional, but I mean there's tons of other screwball comedies that everybody says are more, there's always somebody telling me on the internet, that the comedies I think are screwball or not screwball, and I don't really care. So like people have told me that I should watch the Hudsucker Proxy and more Coen Brothers. The Coen Brothers are fine, but it depends on what your sense of humor type is in terms of what you enjoy watching, I should say. I don't want to watch Fargo 8 million times. It's a great movie. I just don't want to watch it over and over and over. It's just not, you know, enjoyable for me. So, but if you asked me on the street, do you think it's a good movie? I'd be like, yeah, it's a very good movie, especially Frances McDormand. So it's like, you know, whereas Soap Dish, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that movie. It's hilarious. The ensemble is just amazing. And, that's just a really good example. And I didn't realize I was going to talk about more modern stuff, but I'm just trying to bring a slightly more recent examples to kind of give people a framework if they don't have one. I come from because I was exposed to so much classic movies, especially because there was a lot of it on, unfortunately, a lot of it was really poor quality and maybe not the best movies. But in the 70s, they had a lot of UHF channels that had maybe like no disrespect to the Blondie movies, but there was a lot of Blondie movies on, and those are half decent. They're kind of like B movies in the comedy genre, in my opinion. They're worth watching. They're certainly not maybe top tier, but they're certainly fun, and they're worth watching for sure. Especially, I can't I haven't seen all of the Blondie movies, but I've seen a few of them, and they're from the 40s, so they're pretty fun. But and there's different variations of comedy. There's so much variation. There's like crazy slapstick stuff that's all physical, and then there's like a mixture hybrid of physical and musical stuff, or physical and, like, I'm going to tell you next time about Murder He Says. It's clearly a mystery, but there's in between the tone throughout the whole movie is very, very light. It's not even though you're with kind of dangerous people, you don't feel, I guess because Fred MacMurray is doing such an amazing job, you don't feel this heaviness that you would feel maybe in, like, let's say, a Fargo movie. Because I think if there's one thing I can think of that is different, and it didn't, no disrespect to modern movies, it happened way before that. I think probably in the post-war, I'd say late 40s going into the 50s, comedy became very strange, in my opinion. I would have a hard time coming up with as many 1950s comedies as I would 1930s and 40s. Um, Probably because of television. I'm sure all the great writers, left and went to television at that point. So that's probably what it was. But I also think it was a little bit of like post-war. It wasn't so much when the war was going on, um, but it was more when the soldiers came back. And I didn't realize this until recently. I was listening to more commentary from various people talking about post-war Hollywood and during the war Hollywood. And they were talking about how different it was when the soldiers came back and when they would go to the movie theaters. And it was, the audience kind of changed, I think. And of course, to kind of contrast that during the war, so let's say you have like 1939 to 1940, at least 45, you know, you have, for example, this movie, like Murder, He Says, there's a war going on, and yet it's so lighthearted and fun. Nobody's taking it seriously. And there's a bazillion films in the 40s that were like happening during the war to keep people entertained. But people, Hollywood and general, and the masses in general, and maybe because they knew the audience was women. Of course, there were a lot of wonderful career movies for women that weren't dramas; they were comedies too, which was great. And so they probably knew they had a mostly, female audience. But I mean, been a lot of times when it's been a female audience, and I don't think we've ever seen the output of just sheer entertainment comedy that's well written like we can see in the 1930s, 1940s, even during the war. And even during the war, there's examples. There aren't many of them, but there's examples of people of color in, maybe not, well, actually no, there's a couple films where they have lead roles, and they're quite, they're not entirely antagonistic or disrespectful, as you would expect in that time period. There's definitely more roles for women, which makes sense. And it's interesting that, for some reason in the 40s, and the late 30s, the audiences in Hollywood were expected to be entertained and distracted in a positive way, unlike any other time. Like, if there's one thing I wished that we had now, was that. And it doesn't have to come from Hollywood per se, but I just don't watch, any. I very rarely watch anything new right now. Mostly because I always know if it's a comedy, it's not going to be that funny, and it's going to be probably a dramedy, which is like been like that for like, the last comedy I saw that I really enjoyed was Spy, by directed by Paul Feig, and with Melissa McCarthy. And again, that was an action comedy. They're always action comedies. I mean, I enjoyed it. It's got a great cast. But that was almost 10 years ago. I can't really think of any comedies I've seen in a movie that I've enjoyed that much where I've wanted to watch it over and over. I've seen Spy at least 4 or 5 times, and I've really loved it. And I was just so shocked that I loved it. I could say the same thing about music. There's the music that I like now is much older. I usually try and find out music that about people and genres that I'm sort of familiar with, but not extensively familiar with. Like, I love funk music, especially from the 70s and 80s, but then I'll try and find other kinds of funk. Like, for example, recently I put together a 21st century funk playlist that was inspired by a friend of mine. So I tried to kind of find some newer examples of funk. Reggae is the same thing. I prefer the 60s and 70s reggae. I don't really like it when it gets into the 80s because the sound changes. The aesthetics change. So you can see I have kind of a habit of doing this with like various aesthetics. It's like I like an aesthetic ideal. And once that ends, I kind of have a hard time picking up the new thing, for a while. And it's not always because I think it's crap. It's just I don't like the mood it takes. It tends to always take kind of like, for example, music now is very well, okay, let's paraphrase this. Let's clarify. I should say the music that's being promoted now heavily. It's not very well written, and it's not very well produced either. And that's no disrespect to the artists out there. There's tons of great artists out there, and we don't know about them, to be fair. And that's probably the same with like actors and actresses and dancers and all these, singers. We don't know about them because the industry doesn't promote those people. It promotes people that they know will deliver fast, fast and easy. And that wasn't always the case. I mean, yes, Hollywood's always been out to make a buck, and so is the music industry. But there was a time in the 70s and 80s, and certainly in the 50s and 60s for music, where artists and producers were at least allowed to grow a little bit, a little, maybe not a lot. So yeah, that's why I tend to look at older stuff. I don't know. I just kind of lost interest in, I didn't really keep up with pop music after 2010, maybe. Um, I'll, since I'm talking about music, I just thought I'd rant a little bit about, I want to get back to screwball comedy in a minute because I want to show you something, a list that I pulled up. But just so you know, there's a lot of things that I don't like. Like, I don't like Beyonce, never have. No disrespect for her, but never liked her voice. Don't understand what the big deal has been all these years. Don't really care one way or another about Taylor Swift. I did like Rhiannon a little bit. Rihanna, sorry, Rhiannon. That's the Stevie Nicks song. Rihanna. I did like her. I thought she was good. Of course, she's not really around anymore. Some of these other people that I've heard about, I haven't really listened to them yet, but like there's a couple of people I remember people were going crazy over, like Florence and the Machine. Don't get it. Saw a couple of songs of hers and I was like, okay. And I'm trying to think of some, but then there's been some recent people that I've really enjoyed in the funk genre, who I'm sure you've never heard of because they've only gotten like 5,000 views on YouTube, that I think are phenomenal, phenomenal bands. For example, and maybe I'll share this soon, since I'm talking about it. It's the first time I've been inspired to make a music playlist in months, after making them for 3 years, and then I stopped for a long time. This was one I got really excited about, and it's a whole bunch of different bands in the last, I'd say, 10 years. Some of the cuts on it are only a couple of years old, and they're all funk based, or kind of a mixed hybrid of disco and funk. And they're not just techno. They're not, some of them have a little bit of techno in them, which is what you would assume and what I assumed. But I didn't know until recently, and I got so excited about this, that there was a whole movement called new funk or boogie funk. And I guess this came out maybe, as usual, I'm always about 5 years behind things. I think it was about 5 years ago. And, boy, was I waiting for that to come around again, because, that music just makes me happy. So then you got to go with what makes you happy. If country music does that for you, then you got to listen to that. If, rock and roll does it, used to love rock and roll, but they don't really play rock and roll anymore. They don't even play rock. So, and the R&B, I'll tell you this, I did love the neo soul movement that came out in 2000, 2001, 2002. I was very excited when that came out. There was a whole bunch of great singers like Jill Scott, Angie Stone. This is when I was in music retail. And they were really good. There was several others. And of course, at that point, Alicia Keys came in. But here's the thing, Alicia Keys' first album was great. because it was produced by Isaac Hayes. And Isaac Hayes, if you don't know, well, you probably know him as Chef from South Park, but he was a fabulous soul musician and producer. He was like, like Ike Turner and some of these soul guys. And of course, you may know him from the theme from Shaft, but I think he produced and wrote a lot of songs for people. And just a great talent. And he produced her first album. And it's a great album because of the two of them together. She's a great talent. I'm not disrespecting her. In fact, she's an amazing piano player. I think if somebody said to me who is one of the greatest pop piano players out there in the last 20 years, I'd be like, oh yeah, Alicia Keys, great piano player. Loved her voice on the first album, but then she completely changed her sound after that. And I just didn't like it, and I was really sad because I really wanted to like her, and this is what happens. Same thing happened to me with Nelly Furtado. Absolutely loved her first album. It's got a mixture of like salsa, reggae, soul, maybe some guy. She's got a Portuguese background, so a little bit of that kind of Brazilian, kind of bossa nova, but a little more soul hip hop, with some hip hop in there too. And it was such a great album. I'm still a great album. Whoa, Nelly, awesome album. And Alicia Keys' first album, awesome album. And it's like same thing. Alanis Morissette, first album, great. Jagged Little Pill. And of course, everybody knows about that. But then something happens on the second album. Either they change their sound, and I bet you $5, it's the freaking label. The label always says, oh, well, you better do something like this because this is the new style, or they, I don't know, maybe they just get bored with it and they just don't like it. But that doesn't mean I have to go along with them, but on the other hand, I get sad because I'm like, these people are really good musicians. And I really loved that first album. What happened, So anyway, but as time went on, and that was in the 2000s and such, and those were some people that I really enjoyed. And there was other bands, but I mean, and of course there's always great singers, Christina Aguilera and some of these people, Kelly Clarkson. I always thought they were great singers, but I wasn't sure if I always loved their songs. I think I tended to like more of Christina Aguilera's songs in the early days. Kelly Clarkson, I liked one or two of her songs, but it's one thing to enjoy the voice, and it's another to say, do I want to listen to all of their songs? That's where it gets dicey because, like, not really, Whereas somebody like Janet Jackson, who just had song after song after song after song, great songs, right? And of course, she was a great dancer and is a great dancer, and great performer. But I mean, if you just listen to her songs, they're really good. They're well written, and a lot of that was Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis, for sure, which is smart because she could have picked somebody else to be her songwriting team, but she picked these guys who were already established. So when you think about it, you would think that all these big rising stars would like say, well, am I a good songwriter or not? If I am, then I'm going to go ahead and keep doing that. But let's say I need a little help. Well, I'm going to pick somebody, and Janet Jackson, she could have easily just said, look, I'm Janet Jackson. I don't need somebody to help me with this. My brother is Michael Jackson. You know what I mean? She could have said that if she wanted to, but she didn't. She was smart. She went and picked these guys who had already played with the time, who already had success with Prince's, being kind of a proteges of Prince's, at least when they were with time and stuff. I mean, I know things kind of went sour after that, but long story short, she knew they had total props, and chops, I should say, songwriting. And they had also been in, let's not forget, the SOS Band, which is another one of my, I really like them. You may remember them from Take Your Time. Take your time, do it right. We can do it, baby. Right. So they didn't write that song, but they wrote the song Just Be Good to Me. So they wrote that one. The Take Your Time, Do It Right was written by somebody else. And I can't remember the guy's name. It starts with an S. But anyway, long story short, they were established songwriters and they had written for other people too. Maybe, I think they wrote for Patti LaBelle, maybe. I'm not sure. Long story short, you need more than just a great voice or a good band, and sometimes you have all of those. You have a great singer, great band, great songwriters, and maybe you don't have the um, production that you need, or the cultivation that you need, the coaching that you need, which I think they used to get back in the 60s and 70s, especially. They had like really good A&R people who would cultivate them. Like in the 60s, it was the famous ones of Ahmet Ertegun at Atlantic Records and Jerry Wexler at Atlantic Records, and I can't remember the other names, but those are kind of like some of the more famous people who cultivated the musicians. And you just don't get that because nobody wants to, the labels don't want to pay for that. What made me think of this was a guy on YouTube who was, if you're into music, and you probably already know about him, but I had just happened upon him recently, and I might include a link of his in there. His name is Rick Beato, Beato. He has a lot of interviews with musicians, but one of the most fascinating interviews I've listened to him is with another guy who, I don't remember his name, but another guy who worked in the music industry in, I think, the 90s and maybe 2000s. And they just go through the behind the scenes of like equipment rental. It sounds boring, but it's really fascinating. I promise you, it's really interesting. Um, Especially when you compare it to what used to happen. And I think that's what they're good at telling you. Like, look, this is what happened at the end of the music industry in the 2000s. It wasn't always like that. They didn't always bleed the band dry financially before the band had a chance to even break even financially. So that's sort of what I'm getting at when I talk about those things affect how successful a product is going to go out. Because all these great bands that we had back in the 70s and even the 80s, um, it's kind of like a good economy. They had a chance to, I'm not saying they didn't work hard. I'm not saying they weren't overworked, but they also, much like early Hollywood, they had a structure of lots of people helping them, put out a really good product. And for some reason, well, there's a lot of reasons I could tell you why, but over time, it's unfortunate that once you get into the 90s, that especially the late 90s, which ironically was when I first got into music retail. So I was getting into music retail at kind of the end of the heyday of the recording industry, in my opinion, which is why I didn't listen to hardly anything. Well, I listened to some new music because we had to, but as far as wanting to listen to new music, it was very hard for me to do. But I wanted to like it because I was in my 30s. So I was like, I still wanted to hear good music. And the people I've talked about so far were some of the people I remember really enjoying. There's probably a few more people I'm not thinking of that I could bring up in future videos. But anyway, um, so yeah, I'm glad I got to talk a little bit about music, and I may share some playlists down the road. But I'd also like to open it up to maybe suggestions for either music or movies that you want to watch. And what I'd like to do right now, this is the first time I've done this, is, hold on a second. There it is. Okay, so hopefully you can hear me. This is from criterionforum.org, and this is a list I've been referring to for several years now. And what it is, okay, I'll say got it. Uh, I think it's really cool. If you'd like to take a look at this list, and I'll put this link in the comments. But you can see it's got screwball comedies, this cute little picture of Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn from Bringing Up Baby. But I like to go back to this one because to this list every once in a while, just to see, if there's a movie I want to watch, or if I definitely haven't seen all of these movies yet. Okay. I've seen a lot of them, but not all of them. So these are kind of like the basic ones. And you can see here, as identified by Dwayne Burge and Robert Milton Miller in, screwball comedy films, history and filmography, 1934, 1942. So giving credit to them. Okay. So yeah, you'll see The Awful Truth and all the, all these ones that you've maybe heard about. And then I like this part too. And we'll come back to this. Frequently cited as screwball comedies, pre-1934. So that probably means pre-code. So pre-Hays Code. So for example, By Candlelight, if you want to check, I did a little video on that a few weeks ago, or at least a week ago. And that was a first time viewing. I had never seen that one until a week ago. That's an example. I love Goodbye Again. That's a great one. I might watch that one again. A lot of people know Design for Living. Now, Topaz is very interesting. I don't really think that's a problem with screwball comedy that's characterized by some people. I didn't think Topaz was that funny, really. I mean, it's interesting, but it's not, I wouldn't have called it a comedy, but whatever. Sometimes that happens. 1934 to 1942, these are kind of like, I'd say the movies that you think of after the big ones. So they're not B movies, but they're like in addition to the top name ones, top name ones. And there's a lot of good ones on here. There's ones that like Christmas in July you've heard of because that's Preston Sturges. There's After the Thin Man, and a couple other thin men. And then lovely to have him put in here the things like The Gay Divorcee, which is a Mark Sandrich, that's a Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, but also a Eric Bleret and a Edward Everett Horton movie. And that's a wonderful case of it's really a musical. Of course, all the Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers are musicals, but it really is a screwball comedy too. So yeah, you can see there's a really neat list here. So maybe, if you like, look at this list and, see if you like any of these, and I'll watch it and do a little review on it, or take, just, I don't want to call these things reviews. They're kind of reviews what I'm doing, but they're kind of just my thoughts, really. I'm not really, I might give you my opinion on it, but I'll let you know whether I think it's worth watching or whatever. But even something that I don't think is worth watching, you should watch. So, okay. So post 1942, that's the last category. And what's interesting is that's where I decided to watch Murder, He Says, George Marshall. There it is. See, 1945. So that's how I got the idea last night to watch that movie. So since I'm still in the middle of it, and let me turn off the share, and what I can do is I will go ahead and I'll put the link to that Criterion forum so that you can refer to that. And maybe, because I'd like to encourage people, anyone who's watching this or listening to this, I'd love to know what you're interested in me talking about. I can always find things to talk about without, y'all, but I mean, it would be interesting to find out what you guys are into. And yeah, so that's the extent of what I wanted to share today. And I really would love for you to let me know what you like. I will leave the link for Murder He Says in the comments on YouTube. To get to my YouTube channel, if you're from Instagram or some other place that you're seeing this, you can always find me at Cinematic Enthuse, CINEMATICENTHUS. And you can also go to my link tree, which is www.linktr.ee/CINEMATICENTHUS, Cinematic Enthuse. And please hit like and subscribe, and so we can reach more people, especially if you love screwball comedy, if you love musicals. If you missed the last two videos I did one about Bob Fosse, and there was a playlist on there if you want to check him out. And what I'm doing is, in general, I'm always putting the links to whatever I'm watching or whatever playlists I put together or whatever I'm watching in the comments on YouTube until I figure out a better way to do this. Okay, so I hope to talk to you soon, and take care, and see you soon.